All right. So let's start off with talking about it this way, and then we'll go into some detail. Applying the mind and learning to sustain the mind in the first jhana is about 90% of all of the work and effort, about 90% of all the time. Now, the second jhana, you will not be able to sustain it unless you can sustain the first jhana, period. People will pop in and out of the second jhana. All right. Now, the amount of effort that it takes to master the second jhana is about 90% of the effort that it's going to take to get to the third jhana, to apply it and to sustain it. Now, in this word that I'm talking about, applying and sustaining, in the suttas, it talks about the path of that jhana and the fruit of that jhana. To get into it is the path, but to be able to sustain it and keep it going is the fruit. And now the last point is that the amount of time and effort that it takes to do the third jhana is about 90% then of the time that it's going to take to get to the fourth jhana. So at that 90% level, you can say that, okay, the first jhana is 90%, and then the second jhana is 9%, and then the third jhana is 1%, and then the fourth jhana becomes fairly easy to do because you've already put in all the work and all the time and all the effort and all of the skills of sustaining things, so that you can actually now in that fourth jhana work directly with perception, because the thoughts and the salayatana and the feelings are all dealt with in the first and then the second jhana. And so the third jhana is to getting into the equanimity of the feelings so that they get kind of lax. And to now the fourth jhana is where we really pay attention to how the mind works, mostly in the sense of perception. That's why you have those words in the Pali, like boundless space and boundless consciousness and nothingness and neither perception nor non-perception. Those are all associated with the relationship between consciousness, which is the ability to observe, and perception, which is the ability to do something with what we observe. And most
Right.
people, unskilled, what do they do with what they observe? They make stuff up. And it's in the fourth jhana where we can really begin to stop making stuff up. Now, we do that actually in the first jhana already anyway, in the sense of making stuff up, in the sense of language, or in the sense of verbiage, or in the sense of thought patterns. But when we get to the third jhana, then what we do is we're being able to take now those feelings that were so big and wide and wonderful in the second jhana and kind of let them relax.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that there's not much feeling left. So that now when we deal with perception, we find out that it's perception that causes those feelings anyway. So all along, we're dealing with perception at a gross level, at a very gross level, ordinary people. At a less gross level at first jhana. In a third, in the second jhana, we're dealing with perception also, but now we're able to control it. And then in the third jhana, we're actually able to control perception. And in the fourth jhana is where we really take it apart. Okay. In fact, you can think of perception as like thought. In the first jhana, we learn to control our thought so that we can have wholesome thought and wholesome thought and wholesome thought one after another. And then in the second jhana, we put gaps in that perception, or excuse me, gaps in the thoughts, so that there are times of no thinking. All right. So the third and the fourth jhana then are doing that same job with perception. So that in the third jhana, you learn to control the perception by giving it happy perceptions. And in the fourth jhana is where we learn to actually control or stop that perceptual process. Now, this is really all not necessary because the Buddha taught that being able to control your thoughts is all that's necessary because all dukkha comes from unwholesome thinking. This is
Yes.
just these four jhanas really is a matter of, well, what is a monk going to do with his time if he's got years of doing nothing and he's sitting in the woods with no cell phone, no computers, no timepieces, no watches, no other monks, just him and his mind. Okay. That in fact, another example in our world would be someone in solitary confinement. In most places, they put people in solitary confinement because they drive themselves nuts, because they can't control their thoughts. But if you were in solitary confinement and you knew what to do with it, you could just sit there and watch how your mind works. Learn to control the darn thing, become really excellent at just being able to observe.
Yes. Now, this yes, you're going through all the jhanas, but you are also, I believe, saying a lot of the time that all one needs to do is to get to the first jhana.
Mm-hmm.
And so the rest
All of
is
the teachings of the Buddha is wrapped around the first jhana because the second, third, and fourth are nothing more than refinement of that first jhana.
right.
But they're not necessary for you to be free from suffering. And that was what his goal was.
Yes.
That the jhanas were not his goal. He was able to do the four jhanas before he became enlightened. It was only when he understood that, oh, spending our time in first jhana, that's freedom from suffering, rather than going into these high jhanas and then coming back into the ordinary mind, which is what he was doing.
Yeah. Yes.
In a way, he was going all into these four jhanas, but he never actually really learned to control the first jhana. But when he sat down under the bo tree, that's what he started to do. He started to figure out how the mind actually worked, in the sense of what is he looking for exactly. He begins to understand that what he's been looking for all these years is dukkha nirodha, is coming to an end of wanting things, coming to the end of being dissatisfied, and just be satisfied with what you've got. And that's the first jhana. Now, what in the Sutta number 111, when the Buddha is talking about Sariputta, the point about one by one as they occur, you can see how those jhanas are actually one by one as they occur, up to the point of when you can control and end perception, that truly is the end of feelings. So long as there's a little bit of perception, there's going to be a little bit of contact and a little bit of feelings. But it's only when you can bring it to an end. Now, here's the question now. What is left after the end of perception and the end of feelings? What's left?
I don't know.
Consciousness. Remarkably free consciousness of just receiving input, just actually now being in paradise rather than deciding about it. Another way of talking is that perception is almost a kind of a judgment. And when we come to the end of perception, we come to the end of feelings, then what's left? Input.
Yes, well, this is all, it's all happening at once, though, isn't it? It's all, you've got eye consciousness, ear consciousness, touch consciousness.
No, one by one, one by one as they occur. You can see, you can listen, Sometimes you can move back and forth between seeing and listening very rapidly. That's exactly what television expects the audience to be able to do. When you go to an opera, you watch the costumes on stage, and you also listen to them sing. And when the lady is singing those high notes, you want to watch her face. Okay, so they're interrelated, but they're not simultaneous. You do one and then the other, and then one again, and then the other, back and forth like that. But ordinary mind spends the time of perceiving the sight and then deciding about the sight, about perceiving the sight. And then they listen for a little bit, and then they spend more time perceiving what they've heard, judging it. But that's a high note or whatever like that. And so we spend far less time in an opera. Most of the people who are in an opera are not actually there for the opera, they're in their head. And so let me give you an example, because you're an old dude. We can use the example of movie theater film. You know that in the really, really old days, they called them a flick because they ran at 10 frames a second, and that things would flicker. You could see the flickering, but when they ran it up to 24 frames a second, then the flickering is gone and it looks like solid movement. But to be really spectacular, they have IMAX or whatever that runs at 70 frames a second.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, at that 24 frames a second, guess what? There's two things happening. One is that that film is sitting still for that frame so that the light then can be shown upon it. Now, they normally use that by having an arc light that's shown solid, and then they'll have a disc like a fan that'll come in and open the light for that frame while it's sitting still, and then it'll show it dark while that frame is now moving. The flickering is still there, but you can hear it when you're in the projection booth with my dad. Okay, you can hear that chatter because it moves that frame and then stops it and then moves it again and stops it.
Yeah.
For that whole 20 minutes of a reel of movie film before they have to have a changeover. That's why they always have two projections. Is one is being loaded up while the other one is actually displaying. They never figured out how to splice that film together so you had an hour and a half movie in one piece of film. Never did that. So
I know back in my school days, they showed us films. They had a 16mm projector, and I used to help with it. I used to help load it and that kind of thing. So
and so
yeah,
you know exactly what I'm talking about, that chatter of the frame stopping.
Yeah.
Our mind works the same way. Now, in the movie theater, the people will watch that movie. Let's say it's an hour and a half, but the screen only has movies projected on it half the time. The rest of the time, they're in darkness, and people don't even know that.
Yep.
Because that other part of the time is when the film is moving to the next frame. And then when it stops, then the light will open and let it shine for a little while, and then they turn the light off and move it to the next frame. Our brain works very, very much like that, so that we have a C perception, C perception, C perception, C perception, so that we actually are now watching what our perception is and not really watching what the input is.
Yeah. So when you get to the when you get to the fourth tetrad of the Anapanasati, and you are supposed to be you're supposed to be fully experiencing impermanence. I mean, that's the point, is it, at which you are watching the perception come and go?
Actually, if you look at the way that the Anapanasati Sutta is written, it's designed for the first jhana. It is not designed for the second, third, and fourth jhana. It's specifically designed for the first jhana.
I know.
So,
Yes, I've seen that.
all right. So in that relationship, then the anicca, the rising and passing away, or actually the rising, and then the passing away is step 14, and then the cessation is 15, and relinquishment is 16. This is all something that we can do in the first jhana, is to be able to see that things are moving. You can see that when you shifted the laptop, it turned off because the battery was no good, and so when it lost power, it was gone. We can see that kind of stuff. Things happen at a slow, actually, it's probably a good idea to point out that samsara, the cycle of all things, is the description of anicca, except that in anicca, we can see that everything is happening really, really, really fast. But when we talk about it in the sense of samsara, we can see that there are some cycles that go very, very, very slow. Okay. For instance, how often is Mars close enough to Earth so that they can shoot a, a moon landing or whatever like that? Because it's in its orbit and the planet Earth is in its orbit, and sometimes they're close together. Very rarely. Another example of that would be that human nature has been going through some very slow cycles. One cycle was the invention of writing. The second cycle was the being able to print, like the Gutenberg press. The next cycle is now making that information available to everybody. That would be the internet. And then the next cycle is going to be implants. Okay. So so these cycles have gone very slowly, but the cycling is speeding up. Now there's another cycle that we have, and that is the in-breath and the out-breath. This is just a cycle. All right. And that when we recognize that everything is in these cycles, some of them are fast and some of them are slow, some of them are very quick, others are very, very slow, then we can see that those that are slower arise like a sine wave, goes from 0 point up to the zenith, and then it falls down, goes past the 0 point down to the nadir. And then it comes back up to 0 again, and then goes back up to the zenith. Okay, so we can see those nadir zenith cycles in everything. And this is what is referred to in the Anapanasati Sutta, step 13 and 14, is to see these cycles, to see it moving. And then step 15 is to see things are at a nadir. They've gone to the bottom. And so with that, we can then let go of the cycling. Just let go of it. This is what relinquishment or letting go. Here's an example. This is from American culture. Years ago, Charlton Heston, you know, Moses from the 1950s movie. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And when he was in charge of the IRA, NRA rather, he was saying that you cannot take this rifle even from my cold, dead hands. He's still clinging to it after he's dead, right? That you'll have to pry those fingers off of his rifle. Well, that prying the fingers off of our clinging is actually what we have to do. The relinquishment is not just letting go or dropping it. The relinquishment is tearing it out of our hands, taking it away. This is why I often talk about the unwholesome thoughts, is to throw them out, to stop them, to hit them with a bat, whack that cow with a stick. Okay, it takes effort. That's the right effort, is to free that gun from the cold, dead hands.
That sort of rhetoric, of course, is so silly because, you know, what you're going to do, you're dead. You can't stop them. You can't stop them prizing it from your cold, dead hands. Anyway.
Well, whether you're alive or dead, they can't eventually. But the whole point is that while that cycle is going on, the length of the time of the cycle is not a long enough period of time for us to actually relinquish. That sometime during the cycle, we're going to have to learn to relinquish. Just like and I'm talking about with those unwholesome thoughts in the first, getting into the first jhana, we have to actively throw that unwholesome thought out. Guess what? It's going to come right back. Throw it out again. Whack it.
Yes.
That's the relinquishment. It's not a passive thing. It's a very active right effort.
Yes.
It's like cleaning house, right? Cleaning house is not just bewitching her nose and all the dust goes away. No, you got to take a broom and you got to take a mop and you got to take a rag and you got to wipe and wipe and wipe to get that stuff out.
You've watched an awful lot of telly.
Well, I was a child at one time.
Yeah, I know. So
our house was the first house on the block to get a TV when I was 4 years old.
Lucky you. Lucky you.
I'm not sure. We had Liberace. We had the Gillette play. We had Howdy Doody show.
I'm not sure about Liberace. You'd be better off without him. Yes. No, the tendency, I mean, what I do find is that now you get the feeling of leaving aside all the sort of physical manifestations and so on. One gets the feeling that right here, right now, everything's okay. Everything's absolutely peachy, dead, wonderful, and so on. But there is
that but was a lot louder and a lot stronger than it used to be. And in fact, the but used to be so loud and so strong that there never was. Things are okay right now, but it was always the but. That's all we ever had was, oh no, things are terrible.
But there's the knowledge that they're going to be terrible again, and that's the hardest to get rid of. It's like
but we can deal with it again. We've got the power. We've got the strength. We can handle it. If we got rid of it this time, we can get rid of it again. And again.
It's like there's a great lump of sadness and anger and all the rest of it that keeps coming back.
But that can be handled with the knowledge that I can handle it next time too. There's no reason to be angry at it because, the anger is in the beginning when we figured out it's not going to go away by itself. It's going to keep coming back. But now that anger melts away into the happiness of, but when it comes, I can take care of it.
And then there's also the feeling of you're just kidding yourself, pal.
Mm-hmm. Here's an interesting example. The debt collector comes to the house. Now, you haven't been able to make the bills. The debt collector comes to the house, and the housewife is terrified when the debt collector comes. And the second time he comes, she's really freaked out. The third time he comes, she's angry. The fourth time he comes, she's going to be getting used to it a little bit. And the 19,000th time that he comes, it's no big deal. Okay. So this is the way that we have to handle that stuff.